How did Galileo piss off the Americans?
What is the other reference to Galileo that Freddie Mercury sneakily snuck into Queen's music?
How did Galileo give the British a buzz in 1940?
And how is Galileo still flipping the Vatican the bird all these years later?
Oh, the Vatican, they bloody deserve a few birds flipped at them, right? Hello and welcome back to Everything You Didn't Need to Know About. Today we are talking everything you didn't need to know about Galileo Galilei. Today, of course, we will be delivering our favourite facts. Will the best fact of the day come from Nathan Kenny? Will it come from Jen Jewell? Will it come from Thom Adams? Will it come from me, Sam Smith? No, it'll probably come from all of us in our hearts as we come together and share the love of knowledge. I don't know what's happened. I've been derailed.
It's appropriate for you to talk about the love of knowledge with someone who was such an academic and polymath.
Such a polymath, yeah.
I heard he was just some geezer from Pisa.
He had a bit of a problem, though, just that, the old wobbly.
Kenny, it's perfectly natural. It happens to lots of guys.
It
doesn't happen to me because I don't have a penis. But
what?
That's just personal preference.
Jen, we were talking about the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Sorry, a Leaning Tower of Pisa. There are many Leaning Towers in Pisa. The whole city is built on a very soft subsoil terrain where all the buildings lean a little bit.
But without continuing the euphemism train, he actually went up there to test his theories about gravity, right? He was dropped things off it.
He's the guy that proved that if you drop two heavy things at the same time, they fall at the same rate. That happened on the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
It was actually not about heaviness, Sam. It was about
surface area, right?
It was just mess. It wasn't even mess. It was that gravity affects all things equally. So he went up and with a big cannonball, and I think a ball of balsa wood or something quite light, but they had the same shape, same surface area, and they both hit the ground at exactly the same time because gravity affects all things equally.
What about a ton of feathers and a ton of bricks? Which is heavier?
A ton of feathers because you have to live with the deaths of the birds on your conscience.
Yeah. and actually a ton of bricks because you have to live with all the souls of the bricklayers you killed to steal the bricks.
Right. That's right.
And the little pigs who you made homeless.
Yeah. So Galileo was from Pisa, which is a wonderful. I've been there. Have you guys been there?
Mm-hmm. I have.
I went to the train station, got out, went over to the tower, had a look, went back to the train station and went on to Florence, which is another place that was quite big in the lifetime of Mr. Galileo Galilei.
Before we go on to the topic of this podcast, I just want to say, so if you go to Pisa, there's lots of people who are doing this, like getting odd photos.
The leaning.
And holding it up. If you run along giving them high fives, it's about the funniest thing ever.
I took photos of that of everything we were at after that, like the Eiffel Tower.
So the Leaning Tower is the bell tower for the church that's just next by, which is absolutely beautiful. And there are like 1 million people outside looking at the tower. And then you go into the church and there's no one.
You know St. Paul's Cathedral in London? Mm-hmm. There's another Christopher Wren designed church about 250 metres down the road. And it's got a billboard outside that says, the other Wren church. And it's like, please come and visit us. Yeah. And I ducked in there a couple of times and it's beautiful, but it's very small and very empty. There's no one that ever goes in there.
Did you guys know that the Leaning Tower of Pisa is hollow?
Yeah, because it would be really hard to drop things down the middle of it if it weren't.
I'm pretty sure he dropped it off the side.
In my head, he legitimately dropped it down the central staircase. I don't know why I always thought that.
Which Jen would mean it goes...
Yeah, it was because he invented roulette.
And marble runs.
Yeah. Marble runs.
Well, actually, to be fair, Galileo was famous for his work in kinetics and physics, and marble runs are like we talk about the ultimate kind of expressions of physics, and it's marble runs. It's just marble games. What I found really funny is that his last name was optional back in those days. Yeah. Last names were just like something you chose to do.
Yeah.
So he was Galileo, and he's like, might do Galileo in there.
I read that they Galileo and Galilei were like two names that his forefathers had used, and so they used them interchangeably. It's like if we called any one of us by our surnames. So Kenny, what do you want to say next?
I'm pretty sure that Galilei is the Italian version of the Scottish Mick. So you have Galileo Galilei is like Galileo of Galileo. The way that you would have Jock Mick Jock is Jock son of Jock.
Right.
Wow.
Jock was a weird choice of name just then, wasn't
It was. I went with something Scottish and it came out very stereotypical and racist.
Speaking of names,
Typical.
Galileo looked after his little brother for a while, whose name was Michelangelo, which sounds like you're trying to say Michelangelo, but you're just a bit drunk.
Yeah, that's quite weird because Galileo was born 3 days before Michelangelo died.
Sure.
They could have been mates, like an old
does
man
kinda
hanging
feel
out
like-
with a baby.
It does kind of feel like in that time in Italy, you really couldn't walk more than about 100 meters without knocking into someone who was like immensely famous and important to human history.
I see. I thought that as well, and because I found out this thing about Michelangelo, I was like, I wonder when all the other Ninja Turtles lived. Like that's my try, and I found out that Michelangelo was the most recent in time. He lived for about 30 years longer than Raphael, so they're around at the same time. Leonardo sort of was a bit older than them, and then lived into a little bit into their lives. Then Donatello died before Michelangelo and Raphael were born, so he was much earlier than all of them. And yeah,
When was
Leonardo, I presume
born?
he was the leader because he was the only one alive at all the times when all the other ones were.
Is that why Donatello was like the serious dad vibe one?
Yeah,
Because he was the oldest of the turtles.
he was the nerd of the show, much like all of us are on this show.
I just realized why they like pizza. It just never occurred to me in the past that
Kenny, you've blown my mind.
It's because you can fit it down a manhole. That was the assumption. They just dropped it because you try and do like any other food and let it lodged in a manhole, but a pizza.
They could have gone with cannoli because you could have put the cannoli through the individual little holes in the manhole, which would have been really cute. But also
the
then they
wagon
would have all
wheels.
got diabetes. So
The wagon wheels are cool, right? Like they're the easiest ones to fork into your mouth in large quantity. What is your favorite pasta, everyone?
I like the sexy pasta that looks like a cock and balls.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't know what it's called.
Sam, you'll know this. When did Galileo die?
It was 1564.
So he's been dead for 95 years. And some guy comes along 95 years later, this is my fact, and broke off his middle finger.
Amazing.
95 years later, broke off his middle finger. And then that kind of did the rounds of like various people for a long time until it ended up in the Florence Natural History Museum.
You're not talking about a statue. You're talking about his actual
Finger
bone.
from his
Took
body. Yeah.
finger
Probably
museum
didn't have to
and-
break it, to be honest.
Well, actually, it's still
It's
got
detached.
skin and stuff. So
Oh,
Yeah.
it's kind of fossilized.
It wasn't just that finger as well, was it, Tom? It was 3 fingers and a tooth.
But they found them later. That's the thing. Like they had the middle finger, and then later on, they're like, "We've got these other 2 fingers." The guys like, "These are Galileo's," and they're like, "I'm not sure how we got."
We can tell because he's holding a telescope.
This was
the Virgin Mary has 7 heads.
Whoa.
no. She
In
gives
the same
7
vein,
heads.
there are 7.
Tom, for saying things like that, you're going to get in trouble with the Catholic Church, much like Galileo did.
So there's an astonishing number of Jesus's foreskins around. Someone worked it out. Like there's
Yes.
a
I got a bag of them.
bath towel worth. Because the only remnant of Jesus that would have stayed on earth after his ascension was his foreskin, because that was cut off early on in his life.
Yeah.
So when you're looking for a relic and you're in the church, you find your nearest foreskin and you sell it for a large amount of money to a gullible person. So there's lots of foreskins that could perhaps belong to Jesus out there.
So you know how that happened, right? You know how that happened.
You just
It was
stretch
the
it out.
same day that the bread and fish thing happened. So they're like,
Okay.
"Here's on the bread and fish, Jesus," and he's like, "Here's lots of that. Here's lots of that." And he's like, and then someone's like, "Ooh, here's an idea."
While we're talking about dead bodies and tangentially related to the Pope, one of my favorite facts in the world, and you may have heard this before, is in the Vatican, there is slightly more than 1 Pope per square kilometre, because the Vatican is about half a square kilometre in size.
Yeah.
So you've got 1 Pope, and so that gives you 2.1 live popes per square kilometre. But then dead popes, it's like 400.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just
Tom, you were talking before about how that happened after Galileo died. Do you know who was born exactly 400 years to the day after Galileo?
If it's
Was
you, Sam,
born-
I'm quitting the podcast.
Chris Farley, the comedian.
The Galileo of comedy.
Wait.
and he lives in a caravan down by
No,
the
but-
river.
But speaking of anniversaries, obviously the reason that we're releasing this podcast today on the 25th of February is because exactly 406 years ago, Galileo was banned from teaching heliocentrism, which is obviously a date that we all celebrate or mourn rather every year.
That's right. Poor Copernicus.
he got cucked by Galileo hard.
Yeah, real hard.
Because Galileo was investigated by the Spanish Inquisition, not the Spanish Inquisition. No one expected that. They investigated his teaching of Copernican heliocentrism, which is the theory that the Earth rotates daily and goes around the sun while it's doing it. And they determined that heliocentrism was foolish, absurd, and heretical. I just really like that they were like, it's heretical, so you definitely can't do it, but it's also silly, guys.
Tycho Brahe, who was kind of a contemporary of Galileo, had made a bunch of observations around stars, but his thing was like, well, they can't be going around because if they were, they're so tiny there and they're so bright, they must be huge, and that's impossible. So clearly, they just
we can see that itsy bitsy.
He was a super interesting guy too.
I don't know how we don't have more movies about Tycho Brahe. Just the name is amazing.
Yeah. His discoveries were amazing. I mean, heliocentrism made sense. But I find funny is you talk to some physicists will say actually heliocentrism or geocentrism are actually both correct. It just depends on your frame of reference, which is just such a cop out that physicists do. But some of the observations he made of like Saturn, and how he's like looking at Saturn, and he's saying it's actually, he thought it was a three-bodied system. He thought it was one big planet and three little ones, but he called them Saturn, the ring of Saturn. He thought they was the planets, and he thought they were he called them the ears of Saturn. Yeah. And then he looked at Saturn again a little bit later, and Saturn had kind of shifted its position relative to the Earth, and the ring had disappeared. And he went,
Saturn can wiggle its ears.
he thought Saturn. He was like, has Saturn eaten its children?
Which would be very on brand for Saturn.
That's a good classical reference. That's Uranus, though, right? Uranus ate its children. Protos.
I love when you look at the list of like the planets and stuff and like who discovered them. It's like Herschel discovered Uranus. Someone discovered Neptune, and then it's Galileo all the rest of the way. He got all of them. It's weird. Galileo often gets the credit for inventing the telescope, which isn't true. He saw that they were doing it over in Amsterdam, and then he was like, oh well, I've got some sweet Venetian glass because I'm in Italy. I'm going to make my own telescope, and then was like, whoa, look at all this stuff far away. Wait a minute, what's up there?
It was the looking down ones, the reflecting ones, right?
Yeah.
Gather light. Yeah. So rather than I love how he was obviously a bit of a smartass as well. Have you guys heard about his trial and what he said under his breath as he was sort of away? So he's famous for saying, and I don't know it was probably Latin that he said, but he was. They pronounced the sentence. He was found guilty of teaching this heretical thought and all this sort of thing, and he said under his breath, but it's still moving. So meaning like the Earth is still going around the sun.
Yeah.
You can say whatever you'd like. I've already won.
Yeah. He was a teacher at the university that he dropped out of, at the University of Pisa, because when he was a student, but just because his parents couldn't afford to continue paying for him to be there, so he dropped out, and then later went and did a few things, and then came back and was like the head of the department at the university of the mathematics side of things, which people kind of looked down at the time. Then people didn't really take much interest in that, but then later on in his career, he sort of got bigger and more famous, and them totally like owned the whole like sort of wing of the department that he had previously dropped out of. That's awesome.
His academic history is so fascinating because he was training to be a physician, because strange concept for everyone to get their heads around. Doctors were really well paid in those days.
Yeah.
I know, crazy, right?
Kenny, you're a doctor.
Yeah, not a useful doctor.
Yeah, so
he was training to be a physician, and so, but he wandered into a mathematics class by accident, and then went home and was like, Mum, Dad, I really want to be a mathematician.
It was his dad's friend taking the class.
Yeah, it just sounds like initially in those times you just wander into a random room and be like, oh, I've just invented trigonometry.
I do that with movies. You go to the movies theater and then you just wander around into other movies once yours is finished, and then you're like,
that's why you've been banned from Hoyt's 6 times.
Yeah.
But he decided that he was going to study natural history, natural history or natural philosophy. That old degree that just meant everything, basically.
Yeah.
And so he became literally a Renaissance man in the Renaissance, because before he became the Dean of Mathematics, I think, Chair of Mathematics in Pisa, the year before that, he was teaching at the Accademia dell'Arte de Disegno in Florence, teaching perspective and chiaroscuro. So he literally
Sorry, teaching what?
painting technique. So perspective,
Right.
when you make things look small and far away, and chiaroscuro, which is the delicate shading that you get in Renaissance
That
paintings.
would need quite a bit of maths, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
whole
It's a very
perspective thing.
mathematical
This is small, this
concept.
is far away, like the
They're thinking of Father Ted with Dougal
Yeah.
in the class. But I just think that's really cool. Imagine being an art teacher one year and then being the chair of mathematics at one of the foremost universities.
It's almost like being a trained dentist and then becoming a comedy writer.
It's very similar to that, except kind of the other way around.
Yeah.
Being a zoologist and then a theatre major.
I really like music, and I was looking into Galileo and his family, and his dad was pretty well known around the place. He was part of a group called the Florentine Camerata, and they were like a big group of guys who were like musicians and actors and writers and philosophers and everything like that. And they decided that they wanted to bring back the Greek style of theatre that was back in history and people hadn't been doing for ages. So they all got together and they were playing this stuff out. And then this is the sort of the beginnings of opera as we know it. So musical theatre came from all this. Everything, it's kind of all the singing and performances came from this moment, which is quite interesting because then later on, when Freddie Mercury is writing a wee song called Bohemian Rhapsody, he gives a wee shout out to his mate Brian May, who's a big old astrophysics nerd and includes Galileo in that song for his friend Brian. But then, of course, Galileo's dad kind of helped to invent opera. And then the album that Bohemian Rhapsody is on is called Night at the Opera. It all fits together. Everything adds up.
That's very cool.
It's extremely
and
cool.
Mercury is the name of a planet.
And Freddie Mercury
Well
was
done.
the name of the name he made up for himself.
Wheels within concentric wheels, just like the theory of not heliocentrism, the Ptolemaic
theory of wheels.
Yeah.
Queen is the reason that Brian May nearly didn't become an astrophysicist, because he was getting his doctorate and then Queen made it big and he was like, well, I guess I'm going to do this.
I love that he did that and then like came back and finished it when he was like 50.
Do you reckon
That's
he
cool.
would be the worst mature student to have in your class? Because every time they raise their hand, you're like, fuck, it's Brian May. Like, he's probably just going to talk about parties again, but it's going to be so interesting.
I did health science the same year as former All Black Josh Cromfeld, who is like a national treasure when it comes to rugby. And so
It is very much the Kiwi equivalent of doing
Yeah, that's
astrophysics with
oh
Brian
my
May.
god, that guy got hit in the head hundreds of times. He must be cool. He was
The big
generally
difference-
very nice, and he's kind of a Renaissance man as well. He's into art and music and stuff.
The big difference is mature students always sit at the front of the class. And if it's Josh Kronfeld, no problems with here. But if it's Brian May, you cannot see past him.
One cute thing I found out about Bohemian Rhapsody, because in my research for this week, I was Googling things like, why is Bohemian Rhapsody lyrics weird? Trying to find out if there was some hidden meaning behind all of the random things. Turns out, no, there isn't. But obviously one of the famous lines is, Mamma mia, let me go. And the song that knocked Bohemian Rhapsody off the #1 position in the charts was Mamma Mia by ABBA.
What?
Oh,
So Mamma Mia did let them go back down to
That's
number 2.
crazy, because they would have written the song ages before that. Whoa. I love that
Thank
as a
goodness.
fact. I'm going to tell everyone that. Give me a second. Hey, everyone.
Meg.
I just found out that Mamma Mia.
I was looking into other things related to Galileo, and the Pisa International Airport is named after him, so it's Galileo International Airport. But I'm really disappointed that none of their architecture is like on a lean. I just think it would be really cute if like all of the archways were slightly off center. It would probably also really disturb travelers though.
All the planes are slightly lopsided so that they all crash into the ground like MH370.
All of the planes have to land on just one wheel, so you have to kind of slide in on like a cool angle.
He lived much of his life in Florence, which is a really cool place that I've also been to. Don't want to brag about it. Any of you guys been to it?
I haven't been to Florence either.
Great. Oh, it's great. The Kenny, what's the name of that bridge? The famous one,
It's the Ponte Vecchio, right?
Ponte Vecchio. It's the one that's in Florence, anyway. That's famous because it was the bridge that Hitler said was too beautiful, so he wouldn't bomb it during World War II, which is so kind of him. What a kind man. But the other thing I found out about Florence that I love is that Florence has ever had 2 floods. The first was on November the 4th, 1333. And then the second one was in 1966 on November the 4th. It all adds up. Everything sticks together. It makes sense. Nothing to do with the fact that you probably get more rains around the same time of year, but forget that. Forget that. It was the same day, David.
And the ground's all dry because it's just been summer, so the water just like, never mind.
Yeah. Don't mind that. But the fact that it's only twice ever is pretty crazy, and it means I know exactly where I'm not going to be on the November the 4th, 2599. So, I think that maths is right. I did that in my head.
It's worth pointing out, though, that Galileo was effectively found guilty by the Catholic Church and was sentenced to lockdown for the rest of his life.
He was excommunicated.
He was excommunicated and then forced to be in lockdown. People, of course, bubbles weren't really a thing. He hadn't invented them yet. So people came and visited, but then he died of a fever and probably heart palpitations.
Yeah, so, nice.
Well, at least one person came and visited because he had 3 illegitimate children.
I think that was before that, but yeah.
I find it really funny. He wanted to
look at this old blind dying man. Let's see what we can get out of him.
But he wanted to be a priest, and his parents were like, "Hey, you should go make money instead." He was like, "Okay, well, I'm going to be a good Catholic and never get married. Gonna have a bunch of kids though." So
his kids were nuns as well.
Not the one who was a boy. One of the daughters eventually left the cloisters because she was recognized as his legitimate heir and married and made a nice life for herself.
What do you get as heir to Galileo? Do you get like his planets?
You get his patents, so you get lots of money.
You get a quarter of each of the planets. Jen, did you just say the word cloister?
Yeah. It's where nuns live. The cloistered life is a nun's life.
Okay, that's blown my mind because to me, Cloyster is a Pokemon.
Yep.
I thought nuns lived in an abbey.
They can live in abbeys, but the cloisters are where they actually live. The abbey is the bigger building that they live in.
Incredible.
What's really crazy, Sam, though, is that nuns are the highest per capita profession users of Pokemon Go. So.
Cloister, the Pokemon looks a bit like a vagina, so it's a bit weird that they're nuns.
Its face is shaded, though, so it's very modest. But the cat nuns in Doctor Who live in cloisters, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. I just want to point out something, going back to your point about floods, Sam. There's something else that links Galileo to water that is concerning. Did you guys find out in your research about the Galileo submarine? I just found it really cute that there's a submarine called Galileo. It was commissioned in 1934 and kept going until 1940 when it got hit by a couple of missiles and was rendered kind of inoperable, towed back to Port Said, I think it is, in Egypt, and then used to power British boats for the rest of for about 6 years until it was scrapped. They just used it as a massive battery, which is how Galileo gave the British a buzz.
What would have been
that's good, Jen. That's great.
What would have been great about that would be if they'd made it like those Galilean thermometers that you can get that go up and down in the water. So your submarine, cool. guys, we need to go up. Make it warmer. They'll have to rub them. So
they're all pissing everywhere, which brings them up for a little bit, but then cools down.
Yep. He invented the pendulum clock though as well. Like he kind of came up with. I mean, pendulums existed, but he was like, I think he was looking at a chandelier, like Sear.
He was bored during a lecture.
Yeah. He was looking up and he's like, this thing's swinging, it doesn't matter. And he was counting it with his own heartbeat.
Yeah.
So he's using his heartbeat as his timer.
Gangster. But there's so many things where he came up with the concept and then just kind of went, that's cool, and wandered off. And then someone else came and was like, I can make money out of this.
Yeah.
Spoken like a patent lawyer.
Never. My patent law class was at 10 o'clock on Friday mornings, and I almost always fell asleep during it. I did not get a good score.
So Galileo might have been locked up in his later life, but he's probably gone further than most think, because they named the Galilean space probe after him, which has gone all the way out to Saturn and kept on going and dropped off things and all that sort of thing. But it's not the only space thing that's been named after him, because obviously he's got the big space connection. And you know how there's GPS on your phone and GPS in your car and all that sort of thing? There's actually a couple of different versions of that. And so there's the American version, GPS, which is the first and famous one. But they have an accurate version, which they give the keys to the military so they can launch Tomahawk missiles at wedding parties and that sort of thing. But it's quite inaccurate. So the EU made its own version, which is called
Galileo,
which annoyed the Americans because they wanted everyone to keep on using their missile targeting.
That's great. Love it.
It also
Even-
annoyed the British when they found out they couldn't keep using it after Brexit. And they're now going to have to design their own system, which is probably going to suck.
Yeah.
Well done,
Yeah,
yay,
that's the spirit.
Brexit.
How are we going to find our way to the weddings now, guys?
All the parties.
Well, hey, on that cheery note, I think we've got to wrap it up, guys. Let's quickly go around and just remind everyone what our facts were. My fact was that Galileo's dad invented opera.
My fact was the European version of GPS is named after Galileo, as are lots of space stuff.
My fact is that 95 years after his death, someone stole the fingers of Galileo, and now the middle one is there in all its glory, pulling the finger at the Vatican.
My fact was that Galileo inspired a submarine which ended up beached and powering British submarines.
All right.
Dad.
Well, with that, on the count of three, we are going to point to the person we think had the best fact of the day. And a 1, and a 2, and a 3. Well, Tom's the winner, everyone. Take it away, Tom. Congratulations.
Wow, what an honor. So if you enjoyed what we've been talking about tonight and today, please feel free to share us with your friends, comment below on your favorite Galileo fact or something else you'd like us to talk about in a future episode. Share us on all your pipelines, and if you want to have a comment on anything that we said today, please let us know. Corrections are always welcome. And we'll all see you next week, where we will tell you everything you didn't need to know about a thing that you didn't need to know all about.
Bye-bye.
Bye, G-Word.
Gangsters, grandmas, grapes.